Hello and welcome to one of my pre-PTR heroic Icecrown Citadel boss guides, where I've gone through and looked over old YouTube VODs, online forums, and Wowhead pages to try and produce a modern, up-to-date boss guide with as much relevant information as possible. I'll try to present each encounter in the most straightforward way that is applicable to everyone, then leave the discussion of boss mechanics, assignments, and logic for later in the video. Now before we get started, if you'd like to see more WoW content or want to help my channel grow, consider dropping a like, subscribing, and sharing this video with a friend. It really helps me out, and I appreciate the support. Otherwise, thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Lady Deathwhisper is a 2-phase encounter with a 10-minute enrage timer. Phase 1 lasts as long as the boss has non-zero mana. Once her mana bar has been depleted, Phase 2 begins. For this encounter, you will need 3 tanks, 4 to 6 healers, and the rest DPS. Damage taken on this fight is quite spiky and unpredictable, so running more healers early on during progression may prove helpful. However, this is a mechanic-heavy fight, and much of the raid damage going out can be mitigated by doing mechanics correctly. So after some practice, it may be worth having one of your healers swap to the DPS role if you feel you're short on damage. To begin the encounter, have ranged DPS loosely spread in a semicircle around the boss, with melee surrounding Lady Deathwhisper. During Phase 1, the boss cannot move, and does not have a threat table, so tanks will concern themselves with the sets of ads spawning every minute around the room. An assortment of cult fanatics and cult adherents spawn in sets of 3 from each side of the room, with 1 more ad spawning in the back. Have your tanks pick up these ads and bring them to the boss where they can be grouped up and AoE'd down. Prioritize killing the ads quickly. These ads have their own set of mechanics, but the real threat is that these ads can transform into more dangerous ads, and the longer they're left alive, the more likely this becomes. We'll discuss the ads in more detail later. For now, as a general rule of thumb, just kill the ads quickly, and if you see an NPC nameplate that isn't one of these two, the raid must immediately prioritize killing that ad. Aside from spawning ads, during this phase, Lady Deathwhisper will shadowbolt random players, and spawn a green death and decay players need to move out of. She will also mind control 3 random raiders for 12 seconds on heroic. Coordinate CC to keep these players in check for its duration, and DPS take care not to accidentally AoE down your friends. Once Lady Deathwhisper's mana bar has been depleted, Phase 2 begins. Her threat resets and she will now attack the highest threat target, so have a tank ready to pick her up. In heroic, the boss is taunt immune, so utilize tricks and misdirect to immediately establish threat on your main tank. Lady Deathwhisper will apply a stacking threat reduction debuff to the main tank, so an off tank will eventually need to out-threat and tank the boss to allow the main tank's debuff to fall off. 2 tanks will be needed for this. Bring Lady Deathwhisper to the center of the room and have range and healers spread around the boss. She will continue to cast Death and Decay and mind control random players. In heroic, the boss will also continue to spawn ads, but only 3 from one side of the room, alternating sides each minute. Have your 3rd tank pick up the ads. In Phase 2, Lady Deathwhisper also gains access to Frostbolt, which can be interrupted, and Frostbolt Volley. Lastly, Vengeful Shades will spawn and fixate on random players. Upon reaching their target, they will explode and deal large Shadow Frost damage. In Heroic, this damage hits everyone within a 20-yard radius. Players need to run away until the shade despawns. As the second encounter in the instance, this fight is a significant step up in difficulty compared to the first boss, Lord Merogar. However, if you can navigate these mechanics and down Lady Deathwhisper, you're in a good place to take on the rest of the raid. With the general strategy out of the way, let's break down each phase. In Phase 1, the most important thing is ad management. As discussed, 7 ads will spawn in 25 man. The left side of the room will always spawn 2 fanatics and 1 adherent, and the right side of the room will always spawn 1 fanatic and 2 adherents. The ad spawning in the back of the room will be of a random type. In my brief overview of the fight, I discussed one method of grouping the ads up to then AoE them down. There is an alternative method in which DPS are assigned to each side to prioritize killing the ads. Once dead, they swap back to the boss. This strategy is safer, but less efficient, due to the travel time and not stacking the ads. In order to understand why it's safer, we need to first understand how the ads work. There are several kinds of ads. The 2 that will always spawn every minute are Cult Fanatics and Cult Adherents. Cult Fanatics can cleave, apply a healing absorb to the tank, and apply a buff to itself that lets it deal 25% increased damage and heals it for 300% of its damage dealt. This buff needs to be dispelled or spell stolen. On the other hand, Cult Adherents have an interruptible cast, apply a 100,000 damage absorb shield to themselves that reflects all harmful magic done and prevents cast interruption, and apply a curse that increases cooldowns by 15 seconds and needs to be decursed. At random, a living ad will explode, which deals AoE damage and turns them into a reanimated version of themselves. Reanimated fanatics are immune to physical damage, and reanimated adherents are immune to magical damage. Also at random, Lady Deathwhisper will buff living ads. Buffed fanatics become deformed fanatics, and double their melee damage output. Buffed adherents become empowered adherents, adding an uninterruptible AoE spell to their abilities. These 4 special types of ads are the most dangerous and must be killed as priority targets. This is where the difference in the two strategies becomes evident. By assigning DPS to focus down the ads on each side, you're able to kill off the ads quicker. This strategy is safer because the more quickly you kill off the ads, the less likely you are to get one of the 4 special types of ads that are notably dangerous. Furthermore, by assigning melee DPS players to each side, the boss's death and decay mechanic is less dangerous because the raid is more spread out, and mind-controlled players are at less risk of getting instantly killed by AoE. If your raid opts for this strategy, it scales decently well with gear and experience. As DPS players become more comfortable with the fight and do better damage, you can assign fewer DPS to the ad sets to gain boss damage and reduce the amount of time spent in Phase 1. But ultimately, the strategy that scales best with gear and experience will be the one in which all of the ads are grouped up on the boss. This strategy is high risk, high reward, because it sacrifices less boss damage, allowing for a quicker Phase 1. But mistakes made come with a higher cost of consequence. Now, depending on comfort, there are some safer alternatives to the stack strategy. For example, your raid can choose to stack the ads up off the boss, closer to their spawn point, so there is less travel time and they die faster. You may also want to have melee DPS run out right before Dominate Mind goes off, to lessen the likelihood they die to AoE when mind controlled. Ultimately, both of these strategies will work, so whatever strat your raid chooses to utilize will be based on your raiding situation. Once Lady Deathwhisper's mana bar has been depleted, her threat resets and the encounter enters its second phase. In Phase 2, Lady Deathwhisper now attacks the highest threat raid member and applies Touch of Insignificance, reducing their threat generation by 20%. This debuff stacks up to 5 times and lasts 30 seconds. In the normal version of this encounter, 2 tanks alternate taunting off each other to allow the debuff to fall off. In Heroic, however, the boss is taunt immune. This means the off tank will need to rely on their threat generation in order to catch up and eventually overtake the main tank. As such, this fight is very threat sensitive. DPS need to watch their threat so they don't rip aggro, and the off tank needs to try and stay second in threat until they overtake the current tank. Death Knights are great tanks for this role due to their ability to generate immense single target threat without needing to be hit. Other tank classes fall off to varying degrees due to their threat generation relying more heavily on them taking damage. Whatever your tank comp is, it's good to plan around utilizing tricks and misdirect to support your tanks with their threat generation. Aside from Touch of Insignificance, Lady Deathwhisper herself gains a couple new abilities. She will now cast Frostbolt on the current tank, dealing 60,000 unresistible frost damage. This is an interruptible cast that needs to be interrupted. She also gains Frostbolt Volley, dealing 16,000 frost damage to the raid and applying a 4-second slow. Have a paladin run Frost Resist Aura to help mitigate some of this damage, and be quick to dispel the 4-second slow. Priests are valuable here with their MD letting them hit multiple raid members at once. At first glance, this debuff may seem harmless, but not dispelling it can prove deadly. I'll discuss why shortly, but for now just keep that in mind. Have the main tank move the boss to the center of the room with the ranged DPS and healers spread in a circle around the boss. It's important to say spread because Lady Deathwhisper continues her Phase 1 mechanics of mind controlling players and dropping death and decay around the room. Furthermore, during Phase 2, Vengeful Spirits now spawn. These are non-targetable, ghost-like creatures that will fixate on a random player and pursue them for some time before despawning. If they reach their target, they will explode for 25,000 Shadow Frost damage to all targets within 20 yards. If you're being fixated, you need to run. Otherwise, there's a strong possibility you and anyone within 20 yards of you will die. This differs from normal where the ad only damages its target. And now we can tie back the importance of the 4-second slow. Pursued raiders will have a more difficult time getting away if slowed, so be sure to dispel or freedom pursued targets. Finally, in Heroic, Ads will continue to spawn every minute, but now only 3 at a time, and alternating between the left and right side of the room. Have your third tank pick up the ads. Like phase 1, either have your tank drag them to the boss for them to be cleaved, or tank them where they spawn and have DPS swap to the ads. The ads are just as threatening as phase 1 with the ability to become empowered, deformed, or reanimated. Either choice here will work. Ultimately, it boils down to your raid's level of comfort and preference. If you can navigate all of this, keep chipping away at Lady Deathwhisper between ad sets, and eventually she will go down. And that's it. Again, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more ICC guides coming soon. See ya.